Welcome to Sleepy Dreamer in America, where history isn't loud, it whispers. Here we wander through the forgotten pages of the past, stories of presidents, inventors, dreamers, and mysteries that shaped the heart of America. So settle, close your eyes if you'd like, and let the quiet rhythm of these tales carry you somewhere peaceful, somewhere true. If you love stories that teach, calm, and remind you who we are, hit subscribe and drift through history with me. The Untold Nights of Thomas Jefferson. His Insomnia, Inventions, and Contradictions, Part 1. Shadows at Monticello. Night settles on the Virginia hills. The air is still, the kind of stillness that seems to hold its breath. A single light glows on the mountaintop. Monticello, the house Thomas Jefferson built with his own imagination. Inside, while the rest of the estate drifts into sleep, one man remains awake. He moves through long corridors lined with books. Shelves stretch from floor to ceiling, filled with volumes on philosophy, architecture, botany, music, and the mechanics of the human heart. The clock in the hall ticks evenly, its brass pendulum swinging like the slow rhythm of his thoughts. It was his own design, that clock, an invention meant to measure the passing of time precisely, though tonight time feels immeasurable. Jefferson cannot sleep. He has not slept well for years. The servants know this. They see the candle still, burning in his study long after midnight. They whisper that the master's mind never rests. He writes letters, hundreds of them, drafts to friends, arguments to rivals, notes to himself. Every idea must find a page. Every restless question must be answered in ink before he can close his eyes. If you could look over his shoulder, you might see the delicate order of his handwriting, calm and balanced even in the late hours. The script reveals a man who fears disorder above all else. His pen moves evenly, as if steadiness could conquer the storms inside him. Beyond the window, the night air glows faintly with starlight. The Blue Ridge rises dark against the sky. Jefferson often steps outside to breathe that cool air, his slippers brushing against the stone path he designed himself. He looks upward and counts the constellations, recalling the names he memorized as a young man. The quiet of nature soothes him. He once wrote that the landscape was his only medicine. Yet even here, peace does not last. The mind keeps turning. He returns to his study and unrolls one of the sketches scattered on his desk, a new device for lifting wine bottles from the cellar without disturbing the servants, a revolving bookstand that allows him to read 5 volumes at once, the design of a new carriage harness, lighter, faster. His insomnia births inventions like seedlings after rain. Each mechanism, each improvement, is a small rebellion against imperfection. The candle gutters. He replaces it carefully, melts the base so it stands upright, and watches the flame steady itself again. He smiles faintly, control restored for a moment. In this hour, he is not the statesman, not the author of declarations, not the president whose name fills textbooks. He is simply a man alone with his thoughts, haunted and comforted by the world he has built around him. The floor creaks softly as he moves. The air smells of wax, paper, and wood polish. Somewhere below, a clock chimes 2. Sometimes he writes music instead of letters. A few quiet notes on his violin, melodies remembered from youth, from gentler evenings when his wife Martha would play the pianoforte beside him. The sound floats up the stairwell, echoing faintly against the domed ceiling. When the last note fades, silence presses closer than before. He pours a little wine. He was always particular about it. No man, he said, should drink without savoring the architecture of the flavor. Tonight, he sips and stares into the darkness beyond the window pane. Somewhere out there are the fields that fed his dreams and his doubts, the land that gave him everything, and the lives who worked it for him. Even in the hush of night, that truth breathes beneath the calm. Jefferson's insomnia is not merely sleeplessness. It is the weight of a mind unable to close its doors. He thinks about language, the music of it, the responsibility of it. He hears the echo of his own words from long ago. We hold these truths to be self-evident. They ring through his memory like a bell. Truths that he wrote in daylight, now whispered back to him in the dark. What did they mean truly? Were they promises to a nation or promises he made to himself? He sets down his glass and takes up another page. His handwriting remains flawless, but his eyes tire. He pauses, pressing his fingertips to his temples. Sleep, he murmurs, as if commanding his body. It does not obey. He has designed devices for everything but rest. From outside comes the soft sound of rain beginning to fall. He listens. It drums lightly on the roof he designed, the one he insisted should slope just so, to guide the water away from the walls. He watches drops slide down the glass. For a moment, the world feels small and safe, like the inside of a watch. Monticello at night is a living clockwork of Jefferson's making. Every hinge, every beam, every measured line of proportion drawn to his vision. But even perfection cannot comfort him completely. The human soul, he's learned, cannot be engineered. As the rain continues, he lights another candle and reads a few lines from Marcus Aurelius. Stoic calm, he thinks, is the only cure for a restless spirit. He reads until the words blur. Philosophy has always been his companion, though it rarely wins against emotion. He closes the book gently, as one might close the eyes of a friend. In these small hours, he writes not for history, but for himself. A note about the weather, a new idea for rotating crops, a line of Latin poetry. He writes because stillness feels like surrender. Down the hall, a servant stirs, hears the faint scratching of a quill, and knows the master is awake again. In the morning, there will be a list of instructions waiting, measurements for a new plow, plans for the garden, letters ready to send. The house obeys his imagination, even when sleep refuses him. Outside, the rain has stopped. The sky begins to pale in the east, a thin stripe of silver behind the trees. Birds stir among the branches. Jefferson dips his pen once more, signs the page with a practiced flourish, and sets it aside to dry. Dawn has come quietly, as it always does, finding him still at his desk. He rises, stiff from the chair, and walks to the window. Mist rises over the fields. For a moment he feels something close to peace, a fleeting balance between the night's turmoil and the calm promise of morning. The world is new again, and so, perhaps, is he. He blows out the candle. The room fills with the scent of smoke and wax. The day begins, and the night's thoughts retreat into their hidden corners. He will greet visitors, write letters of state, review plans for the University of Virginia. No one will know how long he watched the darkness before sunrise. But, Monticello remembers, its walls have listened to every restless footstep, every sigh, every note of the violin played to no one. The house holds the echo of its creator's insomnia, the sound of a man building worlds to quiet his own. And so another sleepless night becomes another invention, another paragraph, another quiet confession written in ink and silence. Tomorrow, night, the candles will burn again, the quill will scratch its slow rhythm, and Thomas Jefferson, forever the dreamer, will still be chasing the calm that lies just beyond the reach of reason. Part 2, The Making of a Dreamer. Before there was Monticello, before there was the philosopher, the inventor, or the president, there was a quiet boy in the Virginia hills, tall for his age, solemn, with wide gray eyes that always seemed to be somewhere else. His name was Thomas Jefferson, and from the start, he belonged as much to his thoughts as to the world around him. He was born in 1743 at a place called Shadwell, a plantation nestled between the rolling ridges of the Piedmont. The air there was thick with the scent of pine and river mud, the kind of smell that clings to memory forever. The Jefferson family was comfortable, though not yet famous. His father, Peter Jefferson, was a surveyor, a man who drew the boundaries of Virginia with a steady hand and a pioneer's strength. His mother, Jane Randolph, came from one of the colony's oldest families, proud and educated. From them, Thomas inherited both discipline and imagination. His father taught him geometry, how to measure the shape of the world. His mother gave him stories, how to see meaning beyond the lines. Between those lessons, a mind took shape, precise, curious, and endlessly awake. Even as a child, Jefferson preferred silence to play. He loved to read. When other boys hunted or rode, he sat beneath trees with books borrowed from his father's shelves: Homer, Locke, Bacon, and Newton. Knowledge, he said later, was his chosen companion. The world outside could be uncertain, but inside a book, the universe obeyed reason. At night, when the house was quiet and the hearth burned low, he would stay awake by the fading firelight, reading until his eyes ached. His mother often found him asleep in a chair, the book still open in his lap. The candle burned down to wax and wick. Even then, insomnia followed him like a shadow. But he welcomed it. The quiet hours belonged only to him. In those still nights, he began to dream, not in sleep but in imagination. He dreamed of buildings filled with light and air, where learning and beauty met. He dreamed of a land ruled not by kings, but by the reason of its people. He dreamed of music, architecture, invention, all as reflections of a single idea, that the world could be designed for harmony, if only the mind were patient enough to draw the plan. When his father died, Thomas was just 14. The loss struck him deeply. He retreated even more into solitude and study. He began to keep journals, careful notes about everything he saw, from the movement of the stars to the way rain collected on leaves. His handwriting was already meticulous, as though he knew posterity might one day read it. For Jefferson, order was comfort. Words were a way to control the chaos of feeling. He was sent to study at the College of William and Mary in Williamsburg, then the intellectual heart of the colonies. There, the world opened wider than he had ever imagined. He discovered philosophy, mathematics, law, and languages. He read for 16 hours a day, slept little, and seemed to absorb knowledge as if it were breath itself. His tutors marveled. His classmates respected him, but found him distant. Jefferson, they said, was the kind of man who could be alone in a crowd. He learned the violin and played it with quiet passion. Music became his escape, the language of emotion that reason could not always express. Later in life, he would say, "Music is the favorite passion of my soul." Often he practiced alone at night, the notes drifting from his dormitory window over the sleeping town. Sound and solitude became his oldest friends. Williamsburg also brought him face to face with contradiction, the polite salons of philosophy against the brutal reality of the slave market that stood only streets away. Jefferson saw both. He walked past men and women in chains, then returned to his books on liberty. The conflict planted something deep inside him, an unease that would never truly leave. The same mind that imagined freedom also learned to look away. He studied law. Under George Wythe, one of the finest legal minds in Virginia, Wythe taught him the art of argument, how to shape words like instruments. Jefferson learned that language could build nations or destroy them. Every word mattered. He wrote, rewrote, polished, and revised until his sentences gleamed like marble. In writing, he found both discipline and release. But even as he mastered reason, his nights remained restless. He wrote letters until dawn, paced the hallways, read by candlelight. The world of ideas was too alive to sleep through. He once joked that he lived half by day and half by thought. What he didn't say was that the thoughts often refused to quiet down. When he returned home to Shadwell after his studies, he found the old house burned to the ground. Lightning, they said. The fire had consumed the books, the maps, his father's instruments, everything he loved. Standing amid the ashes, Jefferson made no dramatic outcry. He simply watched the smoke drift upward and said softly that he would rebuild. In that moment, you can almost see the future Monticello beginning to form, not yet in stone, but in his mind's unshakable design. Creation, to him, was the only answer to loss. He built his new home on a nearby mountain, a place high, enough to see the horizon in every direction. He named it Monticello, Little Mountain, a word that seemed to hum with both pride and peace. He drew the plans himself, studying Palladio's rules of symmetry by candlelight. He wanted a house that breathed light and balance, a home where the mind could rest, But of course, the mind never rested. As construction began, Jefferson filled his days with legal practice and politics, his nights with architecture and philosophy. Letters from that time show a man perpetually at the edge of exhaustion, but unwilling to slow. "I cannot live without books," he wrote, and then, half a century later, added, "I cannot live without work." It was not ambition that drove him, but something gentler, an inner need to make sense of the world through design, through order, through thought. The more he read, the more he believed in the power of reason, that human beings, guided by logic and education, could improve themselves endlessly. He saw the mind as a tool for freedom, but beneath that belief was a quieter truth. His own mind was both gift and burden. The same intellect that inspired him also robbed him of rest. There are stories that during storms, Jefferson would climb the hill at night just to watch the lightning flash across the sky. He loved the grandeur of it, the symmetry of power and beauty. He was not afraid of the storm, he studied it. "Nature," he said, "is my religion." Perhaps standing there under thunder and rain, he felt the closest thing to sleep. Not absence of thought, but surrender to something larger than himself. By the time he entered politics, Jefferson had already built an inner world of reason and solitude. The real world was noisier, rougher, less forgiving, yet he brought to it the same meticulous care he gave to architecture and music. To him, laws were like buildings. Every clause must balance, every word must support the next. The Declaration of Independence, when he would one day write it, would be the ultimate blueprint of his belief, that words could build a nation as surely as bricks could build a house. But all of that still lay ahead. For now, he was still the young dreamer at Monticello, a man designing his future by candlelight. The night air outside hummed with crickets, the river murmured below, and the windows glowed softly with the light of a single flame that refused to go out. Jefferson looked at his unfinished sketches, arches, columns, domes, and smiled faintly. "There is nothing more wonderful," he once wrote, "than to build a world within one's mind." It was both his gift and his curse. Every world he built kept him from the rest he sought. Outside, dawn crept over the hills again. The candles had burned low. Jefferson finally laid down his pen, not because he was tired, but because the world had called him back to daylight. The dreamer had to become a man once more. Part 3. Fire and Revolution. The year is 1776. Place, Philadelphia. The air is thick with heat and tension. The streets smell of horse sweat, ink, and the faint bitterness of fear. In the upper room of a brick building on Market Street, a tall, quiet man bends over a desk by candlelight. He is 33 years old, his red hair tied back, his eyes shadowed from sleepless nights. Thomas Jefferson has been chosen to write something that might change the world. He works alone most nights. Outside, the taverns roar with argument, patriots and loyalists, soldiers and merchants, all wrestling with what it means to be free. But Jefferson prefers silence. He dips his quill into ink and begins to write, the candle trembling beside him. The scratching of pen on parchment is the only sound in the room. The words come slowly, then faster. We hold these truths to be self-evident. He pauses, stares at the page. How to describe something so vast as liberty? How to give it shape and rhythm so it might live beyond the night? He writes, rewrites, rearranges, the ink drying in thin black trails. He barely eats. He barely sleeps. The city outside blurs into murmurs. In his small rented room, time exists only as candle wax running down the holder. Jefferson's insomnia now has purpose. The restless energy that once built houses and inventions has found a grander structure to shape. He writes with the careful precision of an architect, each phrase balanced like a column, each clause supporting the next. He is not writing for applause. He is building a philosophy that might outlast him. He knows, even as he writes, that the words are dangerous. To declare independence is to invite destruction. But he believes that words, once written, have a power greater than armies. He has studied them all his life. how words can turn kings into ghosts and farmers into citizens. The night grows darker. The candle flickers. He writes on. By dawn, he has a draft. The parchment lies before him, filled with elegant lines and carefully measured thought. He reads it aloud to the empty room, a quiet voice reciting a nation into existence. There is poetry in his tone, not pride. It sounds almost like a prayer. When the other members of the committee arrive, Franklin, Adams, and the rest, they find Jefferson pale, eyes rimmed with fatigue but steady. They argue over phrasing, commas, and meaning. Franklin makes small edits with the humor of a man who knows how heavy words can be. Jefferson listens patiently, though every change feels like a wound. He hides it well. He is used to compromise. Perfection has always been a private pursuit. Outside, the air fills with the distant rumble of thunder, or perhaps cannon fire. The colonies are already bleeding. The Declaration, when it is finally approved, will not bring peace. It will bring a storm. When Congress signs the document, Jefferson stands in the crowd, quiet as always. He does not cheer. He simply watches the ink dry on the parchment that bears his thought. Around him, men shout and embrace, but Jefferson's eyes drift toward the window, to the gray sky beyond. He knows that ideals are easy to write and hard to live. That night, he cannot sleep. The room feels heavy with history. He paces, thinking of the contradiction already growing beneath the surface. Words of freedom written in a land built on bondage. He knows the irony. He feels it keenly. His own life, his own estate, is entangled in the same system the Declaration's words deny. Yet he writes the truth as he sees it, hoping time will one day catch up with conscience. The candle burns low. He pours himself a little wine, stares out the window at the sleeping city. Somewhere, he imagines, another candle burns. On another desk, perhaps in England, where another man writes a rebuttal to his words. He smiles faintly. So be it, he murmurs. Let the argument begin. For Jefferson, the revolution is not just muskets and marches. It is an argument between what is and what could be. He believes reason can build a better world, that men can govern themselves through wisdom instead of force. Yet even as he says this, he knows how fragile such faith can be. He has seen pride, greed, and fear up close. Still, he believes in the architecture of ideals, that if the foundation is strong, the structure can stand. Years pass. The war drags on. Jefferson serves as governor of Virginia, his leadership tested by invasion and fire. British troops burn his home at Shadwell. His family flees Monticello to safety. The revolution he helped imagine now stalks him personally. He works tirelessly, sending letters, coordinating defenses, enduring blame for defeats. Each night he returns to his desk, his mind too full to rest. His wife, Martha, worries over him. "You cannot fight the world in your head," she says gently. But he can, and does. In 1781, the war nearly breaks him. British forces under Cornwallis sweep through Virginia. Jefferson, accused of cowardice for evacuating the capital, faces public scorn. He writes long defenses, rational and calm, even as his spirit falters. "I am done with public life," he says. But history is not done with him. When peace finally comes, he is thinner, grayer, and older in soul. The victory feels less like triumph than survival. Still, he believes the experiment must continue, that the new nation must learn to breathe on its own. He is sent to France as ambassador, where a new chapter of insomnia begins. Paris is another world, elegant, luminous, full of music and ideas. For Jefferson, it is intoxicating. He walks beneath the chestnut trees, attends salons filled with philosophers, tastes food that feels like art. He studies architecture obsessively, sketching cathedrals and courtyards, gathering inspiration for Monticello's redesign. "I am born again," he writes. The French call him le philosophe américain, the American philosopher. But even amid Parisian light, Jefferson cannot escape his contradictions. He writes passionately about liberty while surrounded by the rigid hierarchy of French society. He falls quietly in love. with Maria Causeway, an artist and musician whose spirit mirrors his own. Their correspondence becomes one of the most intimate in American history, letters filled with tenderness, self-doubt, and longing. "My head and my heart are at war," he confesses to her. The insomnia returns with new intensity. He writes to her late into the night, pouring his mind into words that he knows she may never fully return. It is in France that he also witnesses another revolution beginning to stir. The same ideals he wrote in Philadelphia now echo through Parisian streets, liberté, égalité, fraternité. But where he sees philosophy, others see blood. When the French Revolution erupts, Jefferson is both thrilled and horrified. He believes the cause is just, but the violence sickens him. "The tree of liberty," he writes, "must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants." Yet he cannot quite believe his own words. He knows too well how easily ideals can drown in blood. When he finally returns, home to America, he brings with him the scent of Europe, ideas, books, wine, and a quiet melancholy. The war is over. The nation he helped imagine now stands uncertain and new. The experiment of liberty has begun. But for Jefferson, peace remains a distant horizon. The revolution that consumed the world still burns inside him, not as fire now, but as restless thought. Back at Monticello, he unpacks his trunks filled with sketches and inventions. He moves through the halls of his house like a man reacquainting himself with an old friend. The nights are once again filled with candlelight and reflection. He listens to the wind move through the trees and wonders if freedom is ever finished, or if it must be rewritten by each generation, line by line. Outside, the stars gleam above the mountaintop. He opens a window, feels the cool air on his face, and whispers to himself the words that had once shaken the world. We hold these truths. They sound softer now, more personal. Perhaps they were never meant only for a nation. Perhaps they were meant for the man who wrote them, a reminder in his own sleepless nights of what he hoped to believe. The candle flickers, and Jefferson closes his eyes for a moment. Not quite asleep, but closer than before. The revolution, for now, has gone quiet. Only the ticking of his clock keeps time with his thoughts. Part 4. Love, Loss, and Letters. When Thomas Jefferson returned from France, the world he had left behind felt smaller, quieter, but not kinder. The revolution was over, the nation alive, yet his own heart carried its own quiet wars. At Monticello, beneath the Virginia sky, he walked the terraces at dusk, his mind restless, his body weary, and his heart heavy with absence. Martha was gone. For 10 years she had been his constant companion, the center of his private world. They had shared laughter, books, music, and the long Virginia evenings filled with candlelight and song. She was delicate, gentle, and frail, the kind of woman the 18th century both adored and overburdened. Childbirth after childbirth wore, her body thin. Jefferson loved her with a tenderness he rarely showed the world. To him, she was peace itself. In the summer of 1782, as the air grew thick and still, she gave birth to their 6th child. The delivery broke her strength. Jefferson sat beside her for days, refusing food or sleep, holding her hand as her breathing grew shallow. She whispered something to him, her last words, and he nodded, tears sliding silently down his face. When she was gone, he locked himself in his room. For 3 weeks, he did not speak to anyone. His daughter Martha would later remember the sound of his footsteps pacing through the night, back and forth, like a ghost trapped in his own house. He wrote nothing of that time. He rarely spoke of it again. But from then on, every letter, every invention, every sleepless night seemed to carry her shadow. Jefferson, the master of logic, could not reason grief away. He only learned to build around it. He wore her wedding ring for the rest of his life, and though he was a man of the Enlightenment, guided by reason and science, he never remarried. "I have lived in retirement," he said later, "and in the solitude of my grief." But solitude, as it had always done, became both comfort and burden. In those years, he turned again to work, to thought, to creation. Monticello became more than a house. It became therapy. He redesigned every column, every staircase, every garden path. The home became an extension of his mind and, perhaps, a way to keep from losing himself to memory. "Architecture," he said once, "is my delight, and putting up and pulling down, one of my favorite amusements." But behind the amusement lay ache. The building and rebuilding were a way of holding control over what life had taken. When night fell, he would often sit by the window in the same chair where Martha once read by his side. The house creaked in the cooling air, the candles burned low, and sometimes when the wind passed through the shutters, he would imagine he could still hear her voice, light as the rustle of the curtains. His daughters said he smiled then, not with joy, but with gratitude. That memory still had sound. Years later in Paris, Jefferson met Maria Causeway, the married artist with a mind and heart that matched his own. She was everything the Enlightenment celebrated. Brilliant, charming, fluent in philosophy and art. They walked through gardens and galleries, speaking of beauty, reason, and the nature of happiness. For the first time since Martha's death, Jefferson felt the stir of something alive inside him. But Maria belonged to another life, another world. Their affection was deep but impossible. So Jefferson turned their connection into letters, long, flowing, eloquent letters that still survive. In one he wrote, "My head and my heart, madam, are enemies." It was perhaps the most honest sentence he ever wrote. The man who built nations from logic found himself powerless before emotion. The dialogue between my head and my heart, as he titled that letter, reads like a window into his sleepless soul. The head speaks of restraint, of reason, of duty. The heart pleads for feeling, for tenderness, for joy. And Jefferson, ever the architect of balance, could not choose between them. He was always both, a man divided by his own brilliance. He wrote to Maria for years, even after returning to America. Their correspondence was a kind of shared insomnia, words traveling across oceans, carrying thoughts too delicate to speak aloud. He called her "my dear friend," but the tone was softer than friendship, more private than love. Each letter ended the same way. "Adieu, my dear madam, yours affectionately." There was warmth in it, but also resignation, as if affection were all he would allow himself. Back home, Monticello filled again with laughter, children, and the rhythm of work. Yet his nights remained quiet and long. He rose with the sun, and often wrote past midnight. When he could not sleep, he walked the halls with a lamp, making notes on small scraps of paper. New inventions, measurements, ideas for crops, sketches for a better plow, a better clock, a better world. The servants whispered that their master never slept, that even the candles seemed to burn longer for him than for anyone else. He designed devices to help him work faster. A rotating bookstand that held 5 open volumes at once. A copying machine that duplicated every letter he wrote. Even his insomnia became productive. The mind that could not rest simply built tools to make sleeplessness efficient. But beneath the calm exterior, his contradictions deepened. He owned enslaved people, hundreds by the end of his life, and yet wrote endlessly of liberty. He hated slavery, he said, and yet he could not or would not let it go. He wrote, "I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just." But his trembling never turned to action. Each night, the contradiction lay beside him like a weight. Among the enslaved at Monticello was one who would shape his private story forever, Sally Hemings. She was the half-sister of his late wife, a woman both bound to him and never free of him. When she was a teenager, she accompanied his daughter to Paris, where she lived in a world that offered glimpses of freedom. And there, in that city of reason and art, her relationship with Jefferson began. It is a story that still stirs debate. Love or coercion, affection or imbalance of power. Perhaps it was all of these intertwined. Sally Hemings bore 6 of his children. 4 lived to adulthood. Jefferson never acknowledged them publicly, though his records, meticulous as always, note their births. He freed none of them during his lifetime, but all were freed after his death, as he had quietly arranged. It is a chapter that no architecture of words can balance. His life, for all its brilliance, was shadowed by the very injustices he wrote against. Yet even in this, the paradox of Jefferson endures. A man who saw himself as a builder of harmony, yet could not reconcile his own. In the long nights, he must have felt it. The weight of moral dissonance pressing against the quiet rhythm of his thought. His letters from those years grow gentler, sadder. He writes more often of gardens, of sunsets, of the color of the sky after rain. As though beauty could still redeem contradiction, if only for a moment, and perhaps in his way he found peace there. In the garden he planted for Martha, he would walk among rows of flowers at twilight, lavender, sage, and the white blooms she had loved. The light at Monticello turns gold at that hour, soft as a lullaby. His daughter wrote that he often hummed to himself then, low and tuneless, as if speaking to ghosts. Inside the house, his clock ticked, one of his own inventions, designed to mark not just hours, but the passing of the planets. Each swing of its pendulum sounded steady, endless, like time itself refusing to sleep. If you stood outside his window then, you might see him bent again over his desk, the candlelight painting his face in warm shadow. His pen would be moving, perhaps another letter to an old friend, perhaps a set of calculations for an invention no one else would ever see. The man who had given the world its words of freedom still searched for his own. And somewhere in the quiet, the line between memory and dream blurred. Martha's laughter, Maria's music, Sally's silhouette against the firelight, all the women he could never fully hold, living together in the space between thought and sleep. Jefferson's nights were filled not with rest, but with echoes, and so the dreamer worked on, through grief and contradiction, through reason and remorse, a man who built to remember, and remembered to build. Part 5. The Philosopher and the Presidency. Morning light creeps over Monticello's dome, spilling through the tall windows of the entrance hall. Thomas Jefferson, now in his 50s, sits at a desk surrounded by books and letters. His spectacles rest low on his nose. Outside, the gardens shimmer with dew. Inside, the world presses in. He has spent years trying to avoid public life. He has built, written, studied, and dreamed. But the new republic, fragile and uncertain, calls him back. He does not seek power. He never truly has. Yet power has a way of finding men who seem to understand it too well. When George Washington asks him to serve as Secretary of State, Jefferson hesitates. "I had rather be at home," he writes, "tending my garden." But he accepts. Duty to him is an architecture as binding as stone. In Philadelphia, he joins a government still learning to walk, an experiment of men and ideas, poised between order and chaos. From the start, Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton are opposites made visible. Hamilton, all fire and finance, wants a strong central government, a nation of commerce and industry. Jefferson, the philosopher of the plow, dreams of small farms and quiet liberty. To one, cities are the future. To the other, they are corruption waiting to happen. Their debates fill cabinet rooms with heat that no candle could match. At night, when the arguments are over, Jefferson returns to his lodging, exhausted but awake. He pours a glass of wine and stares out at the city street. Somewhere he hears the faint echo of Hamilton's voice, sharp, confident, unstoppable. He sighs, half in admiration, half in irritation. He has genius, Jefferson admits in a letter, but no heart. Perhaps what he means is that Hamilton's certainty frightens him, because it mirrors the certainty he hides behind gentleness. The politics of the 1790s become his new insomnia. Newspapers attack him. Allies demand more of him. He longs for Monticello, for the quiet company of books and daughters. Yet he cannot turn away. He sees the Republic bending under the weight of its own ambition, and he feels bound to steady it. When he finally resigns, it is with both relief and sadness, like a man closing a book he cannot bear to finish. But the world will not let him rest. The election of 1800 approaches, fierce and bitter. The young nation seems on the brink of tearing itself apart. Jefferson is called again, not by ambition but by inevitability. He stands for the presidency, not as a warrior, but as a philosopher reluctantly drawn to the battlefield. The campaign is brutal. His enemies call him atheist, coward, dreamer. His supporters call him savior of liberty. Jefferson himself says, "Little?" He lets time and patience do the talking. When, after a tied election and days of chaos, he finally becomes the third president of the United States, he accepts with calm words and trembling hands. "We are all Republicans, we are all Federalists," he says in his inaugural address. His voice, witnesses recall, was soft, almost shy. So quiet the crowd had to lean forward to hear him. It is 1801, and the philosopher becomes the head of a nation. From the first day, he vows to lead not as a monarch, but as a neighbor. He walks to his inauguration instead of riding in a carriage. He greets visitors without ceremony, shaking hands rather than bowing. He cuts government expenses, refuses pomp, and insists that democracy should look plain. The sum of good government, he writes, is a wise and frugal one. In the White House, still half-finished, still echoing with newness, he rearranges everything. He sells off ornate furniture, replaces candles with his own clever lamps, fills rooms with books and maps. At night he eats simple meals, sometimes alone, sometimes with friends. There is laughter, conversation, the clinking of glass, and then when the house grows quiet, the inevitable scratching of his pen against paper until dawn. He writes letters, endlessly, more than 20,000 in his lifetime. To political allies, to scientists, to inventors, to children, to strangers. The nation's thoughts pass through his quill. Sometimes he writes 3 at once, using his copying machine, the twin. Pens moving like mechanical wings. It is work and meditation, creation and escape. But the presidency is not peace. It is constant motion, and Jefferson's belief in balance is tested daily. He preaches liberty, yet authorizes embargoes. He distrusts armies, yet sends troops against the Barbary pirates. He dreams of a small republic, yet presides over a growing empire. Each decision weighs on him long after the candles go out. Then comes the Louisiana Purchase, an event as vast as it is unexpected. Napoleon, distracted by war, offers the United States an entire continent's worth of land. Jefferson hesitates. He knows the Constitution gives him no clear right to make such a purchase. His philosopher's mind battles with his statesman's instinct. But the dream of an agrarian republic, of endless space for farmers, thinkers, and dreamers wins out. He signs the deal. For $15 million, the country doubles overnight. That night, Jefferson cannot sleep. He walks the halls of the White House, candle in hand, staring at maps pinned along the walls. Rivers without names, mountains unmeasured, lands stretching beyond imagination. He whispers to himself, "Empire of Liberty." The phrase pleases him, though he knows empire is a dangerous word. To explore this vast new world, he sends Meriwether, Lewis and William Clark West. He gives them instruments, journals, and precise instructions. "Observe everything," he writes, "for nothing is unimportant." Their journey becomes an extension of his own curiosity, his restless intellect, marching across the wilderness. Each report they send fills him with quiet pride. In their discoveries, he sees proof that reason and courage can tame even the unknown. Yet as his country expands, so does his fatigue. The years in power carve new lines into his face. Friends die, enemies multiply. The newspapers mock his idealism. He maintains composure, even charm, but those close to him notice his hands tremble more than before. He drinks wine later into the night. He walks longer before bed, trying to calm the ceaseless hum of thought. There are victories, too. Small, human ones. He hosts simple dinners where poets and farmers sit beside diplomats. He listens more than he speaks, letting silence be part of conversation. He keeps a mockingbird in a cage by his window, teaching it to whistle fragments of Italian songs he learned in Paris. Guests remember how, during moments of stress, Jefferson would stop mid-sentence, turn to the bird, and smile faintly, as though the melody alone could steady him. And yet, the contradictions never leave. The philosopher who wrote of liberty continues to own people. He walks the gardens of the White House while others labor unseen to maintain its comfort. At times, he rationalizes. At times, he simply avoids the thought. The balance he seeks in politics eludes him in life. When his second term nears its end, Jefferson feels the weariness deep in his bones. "The office of president," he writes, "is a splendid misery." He declines a third term and looks again toward Monticello, toward the mountain that has always meant home. The farewell is gentle. He rides away quietly. No grand procession, just the creak of saddle leather and the whisper of wind through the trees. Back home, he steps off his horse and breathes in the scent of his gardens. The same hills that watched him dream as a boy now watch him age. He is 66, his hair white, his mind still racing. He spends his evenings writing letters, redesigning furniture, and drawing up plans for a new project, the University of Virginia, his last act of usefulness. He wants a place where knowledge itself will be the temple, where no religion, no dogma, no crown will rule the mind. Light and liberty, he says, go together. At night, he sits before the fire, surrounded by blueprints. The flames flicker across his face, and he smiles at the thought that even now, he is building something. Sleep comes rarely, but peace sometimes visits in the form of small sounds. The crackle of the hearth, the murmur of wind outside, the rhythmic tick of the clock he designed long ago. He writes to John Adams, his old rival turned friend. Their letters are tender, wise, full of shared regret and humor. Two old revolutionaries, once enemies, now companions in reflection. You and I, Jefferson writes, ought not to die before we have explained ourselves to each other. The correspondence stretches across years, an invisible bridge between Quincy and Monticello, between two restless minds that finally learned to rest in conversation. Sometimes after finishing a letter to Adams, Jefferson sits quietly for a long time. The candle flickers, the house creaks, and in the soft glow of night, the philosopher-president closes his eyes, not to sleep, but to listen, to memory, to silence, to the faint echo of all he has built and all he has failed to build. The experiment continues. The nation still grows. His own heart, however, finally begins to slow. Part 6N. The twilight years and the dream of learning. The mountain had always been his refuge, and now, in the final decade of his life, it became his whole world. Monticello stood as a kind of mirror, a reflection of Thomas Jefferson's mind, beautiful, complex, orderly, and full of quiet contradictions. Each morning, as the mist lifted from the Virginia hills, Jefferson would rise before dawn. Old age had thinned his frame and whitened his hair, but not dimmed his curiosity. Even now, in his 80s, he began every day the same way, a ritual as much about thought as about time. He'd step onto the portico with a small notebook in hand, the early light brushing the edges of his face. He recorded the temperature, the wind, the first bird he heard, and the color of the sunrise. He had been doing this for over 50 years, tracking the moods of the world as if nature itself were a friend who wrote back. Then came breakfast. Simple bread, coffee, perhaps a small fruit from the orchard, and afterward letters, always letters. Piles of them, arriving by horseback from across the country. Questions from young scholars, requests from politicians, pleas from strangers. He answered nearly all of them. Even in old age, his mind moved like a river, restless and alive. But there was one project now that consumed his heart, one dream that carried the same fervor that once built a nation. He called it the hobby of my old age, the University of Virginia. To Jefferson, education was the purest expression of freedom. He believed that ignorance, not tyranny, was the true enemy of mankind. If a nation expects to be ignorant and free, he wrote, it expects what never was and never will be. And so, even as his hands trembled and his eyesight faded, he designed, when with his own pen, a place where knowledge could live without chains. He drew the plans himself, the lawn, the rotunda, the colonnades that curved like open arms. He wanted no chapel at the center, only a library, reason in place of religion, light in place of dogma. Here, he said softly, we will teach all things useful and honorable. The design was more than architecture. It was philosophy, made visible. The columns rose like thought made stone, each one a promise that wisdom would outlast the body. Often, when the day cooled, Jefferson would ride down from Monticello to the construction site, his horse picking its way slowly through the red clay paths. Workmen would stop and remove their hats as the old man approached. He'd dismount carefully, study the lines of a wall or the angle of a window, and make small adjustments in neat handwriting on scraps of paper. A little more grace, he'd murmur, or the light must fall here. Even as arthritis curled, his fingers and gout burned his feet, he would kneel beside masons to explain how a curve should catch the morning sun. There was peace in it, to shape something lasting, even as the body that built it began to fade. At night, after returning to Monticello, he would sit by the fire and draft letters about the university to anyone who would listen. Friends, legislators, donors. His tone was both persuasive and tender. This institution, he wrote, will be based on the illimitable freedom of the human mind. Freedom, after all, had always been his first and final word. The neighbors said they could sometimes see the glow of his study late into the night, the same candle that had burned through revolutions still flickering over paper and ink. His servants knew better than to disturb him then. They'd hear the soft rhythm of his quill, then silence, then another page turned. Sleeplessness had been his lifelong companion, but now it felt gentler, almost welcome. A bridge between his busy mind and the slow passage of time. When sleep came, it was shallow. He often dreamed of rivers, of bridges unfinished, of sunlight through trees. In the mornings, he would write down fragments, not of the dreams themselves, but of the feelings they left behind. My mind, he once wrote, is like a garden that cannot rest. It grows even in the dark. The world beyond Monticello had changed. The young republic he helped design had grown larger, noisier, and more divided. He read of new parties, new conflicts, and smiled wryly. Every generation, he said, needs its own revolution. His tone was neither bitter nor proud, only resigned, as if he had finally accepted that no architecture of reason could fully contain the chaos of human ambition. Yet, for all his serenity, he was not untouched by hardship. Debt, accumulated over decades, began to shadow him. His land had never yielded enough to sustain his experiments in hospitality. He had borrowed often, giving freely to others, confident that the future would repay the past. But the economy turned against him. By the late 1820s, his creditors were closing in. There were days when he walked the halls of Monticello, gazing at the books and artifacts he loved, knowing many might soon be sold. The thought pained him, but he faced it with the same quiet stoicism that had marked his life. I am rich, he told a friend, in nothing but experience. Still, the weight of debt worried him. His beloved home, the one he had built from youth to old age, might not remain in the family. And yet, he refused despair. He found solace in conversation, in letters, in philosophy, and most of all, in the laughter of his grandchildren. They adored him. To them, he was not the third president or the author of the Declaration. He was simply Grandpapa Jefferson, the gentle old man who read them stories, taught them to measure stars, and invented small toys to amuse them. They would climb onto his knees as he showed them how his writing machine worked, two pens moving in perfect harmony. See, he'd whisper, when one writes, the other follows, like thought and echo. In their presence, he seemed lighter, more human. For a while, the contradictions of his life, liberty and bondage, reason and sorrow, fell silent. There was only warmth, the soft sound of laughter and the flicker of a man's better nature. As the university neared completion, Jefferson rode there one last time to see it finished. The brickwork gleamed in the sunlight. Students would soon fill the lawns. Standing before the rotunda, his masterpiece of symmetry and hope, he leaned on his cane and smiled faintly. "It is well," he murmured. "I have lived to see it." Those nearby said his eyes glistened, not with pride, but with gratitude. He returned home quietly that evening. The air was cool, the valley bathed in violet dusk. From his study window, he could see the distant white dome of the university, gleaming like a small moon rising from the earth. He stood for a long time, leaning on the sill, the soft wind brushing his face. "Light and liberty," he whispered. Again. It was the closest thing to prayer he ever knew. As the years wound down, his health grew frail. He walked slower, wrote less. His hand shook too much for fine sketches, though he still dictated letters. Pain came in waves, and yet he never complained. "A painful body," he said once, "is an inconvenience to an active mind." His friends urged him to rest. He only smiled. "Rest," he replied, "is the reward of those who have no more to do." When the nights grew too long, he would sit by the fire and watch the flames. Sometimes he spoke aloud, to no one in particular. He recited lines from Homer, or mused about the balance of nature. His servants said he often spoke as if giving a lecture to the darkness, the words soft and rhythmic, like someone trying to soothe a child to sleep, though the child was his mind. In April 1826, he wrote one of his last letters, an invitation to celebrate the nation's 50th birthday. "May it be to the world," he wrote, "what I believe it will be, the signal of arousing men to burst the chains and to assume the blessings of self-government." Even at the end, his faith in reason, in liberty, remained unshaken. That summer, illness returned. The nights were long and heavy with silence. He grew weaker each day, yet he seemed calm, as if he knew the design of his own ending. On July 3rd, he whispered to those near him, "Is it the 4th?" They told him, "Not yet, sir, but it soon will be." He smiled faintly. "Ah," he said, "very good." And in the early hours of July 4th, 1826, 50 years to the day since the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson drew his final breath. The clock in the hallway stopped at noon. At nearly the same hour in Massachusetts, his old friend and rival John Adams would whisper his last words. "Thomas Jefferson survives." He did not know Jefferson had already gone. That night, the sky over Virginia was unusually clear. Monticello stood quiet, its windows dark, its halls filled with still air. The moon rose above the mountain, shining on the house he had built and rebuilt through a lifetime of thought and sleepless labor. Inside, the candle on his desk, the last one he ever lit, had burned itself out completely, leaving only a faint curl of smoke rising toward the ceiling. It swayed in the silence for a moment, then vanished. And for the first time in 83 years, Thomas Jefferson finally slept. Part 7, Legacy of Light and Shadow. The mountain was quiet after his death. Monticello stood like an emptied shell, the echo of footsteps replaced by the rustle of wind and the faint hum of cicadas. The house, once alive with invention and conversation, seemed to breathe differently. Now, the man who had designed its every curve and corridor was gone, and yet his presence lingered in every wall, every window, every precisely measured beam of light. Thomas Jefferson had once written that architecture, like philosophy, was an act of hope, a structure built to outlast its maker, and in that sense, Monticello was his greatest autobiography. It told his story silently, a mind that sought harmony even when life refused to give it. But outside those walls, the country he had helped create continued to grow, to argue, to dream. His ideas, his contradictions, his words, all became part of the nation's bloodstream. For most Americans, Jefferson was not simply the third president or the man on the nickel. He was something deeper, the author of possibility. All men are created equal. The phrase still glowed like a lantern in the American imagination, even as its author had lived surrounded by the shadows of inequality. It is impossible to speak of Thomas Jefferson without speaking of that contradiction. It is a wound at the center of his brilliance, a silence at the heart of his eloquence. He wrote of liberty with a precision that could move the world, and yet, in his own home, men and women remained enslaved. He rationalized it, debated it, even expressed sorrow about it. He called slavery a moral depravity and a hideous blot. But he never freed most of those he owned. He believed the institution would die away naturally, though deep down, he must have known that injustice never dissolves quietly. It must be dismantled by will. Modern historians still argue over how to judge him. Was he a man trapped by his time, or a man who, knowing better, lacked the courage to act? The truth perhaps lies somewhere in between. He was both brilliant and blind, compassionate and cautious. A man of light who never truly escaped the gravity of shadow. And yet the light he left behind continues to shine. His words, not his wealth, not his property, became the enduring currency of his life. Generations after his death, those words would inspire revolutions, movements, and songs. The Declaration of Independence would be quoted by abolitionists, suffragists, civil rights leaders, each one claiming the promise Jefferson had written, even if he had failed to live it fully. That is the strange and haunting thing about ideas. They outgrow their authors. They evolve, they rebel, they continue walking long after the writer has stopped breathing. Jefferson's America, imperfect as it was, gave birth to an America that dared to question him. In that way, he still teaches. Beyond politics, Jefferson's legacy lingers in quieter places, in inventions, in books, in gardens. He was, above all else, a curious man. He invented a wheel cipher for secret messages, a folding chair for travel, a rotating stand for books. He improved plows, designed dumbwaiters, and drafted plans for a macaroni-making machine long before pasta became common in America. In his study, there were always sketches, half-finished diagrams, ideas waiting to be built. He once said that the useful and the beautiful are never far apart, and his life seemed to prove it. He believed in science as deeply as others believed in scripture. When thunder rolled over Monticello, he didn't see divine wrath. He saw natural wonder. A lesson in physics. He measured everything, the height of trees, the yield of crops, the distance between planets. In every measurement, he seemed to be searching for a pattern, some quiet order behind the chaos of the world. His gardens reflected that same search for harmony. They were not merely decorative, they were experiments. He planted over 300 varieties of vegetables, testing soil, watching the seasons like a poet studies words. He wrote, "The failure of one thing is repaired by the success of another," as if the garden were teaching him philosophy in return. There is something deeply human in that image, an aging man, stooping to touch the earth, seeking balance between what grows and what fades. But Jefferson's curiosity wasn't confined to science. It extended to language, music, and even silence. He played the violin for hours in his youth, believing it calmed the soul and disciplined the mind. "The art of music," he said, "is the most delightful recreation that mortals can have." Even late in life, when his hands could no longer play, he still listened. Visitors recalled him sitting near an open window, eyes closed, letting a melody drift in from another room. Perhaps that's how he learned to listen to ideas as well, not as noise to conquer, but as harmonies to explore. It's why he read so widely and corresponded so eagerly. He believed that truth was not a fixed monument, but an ongoing conversation. "Difference of opinion," he wrote, "is not a difference of principle." In that sense, Jefferson's true religion was curiosity. He rewrote the Bible in his later years, removing miracles and divinity, leaving only the moral teachings of Jesus. To some, it was heresy. To him, it was reverence, stripping away the supernatural to find the wisdom underneath. The Jefferson Bible, as it's now called, ends without resurrection, without spectacle. only with the serenity of a man who believed that truth needs no miracle to shine. He believed in the mind as the sacred temple, and in knowledge as the path to grace. Today, the echoes of that belief remain everywhere, in the steps of the University of Virginia, where students still walk under his columns. In the words of the Declaration, read each Independence Day. In the shape of the Capitol dome, inspired by the same symmetry he once drew in candlelight, and yet alongside those tributes stands an unease. The awareness that the same man who dreamed of equality denied it to many who worked beneath his roof. That his mansion, so full of light, was also built by enslaved hands. To walk through Monticello today is to feel both awe and discomfort. The air carries a strange mix of gratitude and grief. Guides speak softly, aware that this is not just a story of one man, but of many, some named, many forgotten. They tell visitors that Jefferson's genius cannot be separated from his blindness. That greatness in the American story often comes with a price, but perhaps that is precisely why his legacy endures, because it forces reflection. He reminds us that ideals are easy to write, harder to live, that progress is not purity, it is struggle, revision, and persistence, and that even flawed men can create enduring light. In a way, Jefferson's legacy is less like a monument, and more like a melody, one that changes with each generation. Some hear beauty, others hear dissonance. Both are true. His life invites us not to worship, but to listen, carefully, humbly, to what it teaches about ambition, reason, and the restless nature of the human spirit. He once wrote, "I like the dreams of the future better than the history of the past." That single line may be his most honest confession. He was, even in old age, a man who dreamed forward. He saw in America not what it was, but what it might become. A place where knowledge, freedom, and compassion could grow side by side. He did not live to see that dream fulfilled, but perhaps that was never the point. His role was to light the path, not to walk it to the end. As dusk settles on Monticello now, the air cool and still, the windows catch the last colors of the sky. Inside, the old clocks he designed have long stopped ticking. The ink on his desk has long dried. And yet his handwriting, his questions, his restless search for understanding, they all remain, suspended in history like a breath that never quite faded. Somewhere between the candlelight and the contradiction, Thomas Jefferson remains, not as saint, not as villain, but as something far more human. A man who built, dreamed, doubted, and dared to imagine that knowledge itself could be a kind of love. And so, when you think of him, when you hear the slow turning of a page or the sound of a quill scratching in the night, remember this: the pursuit of understanding is never finished. It passes from one mind to another, from one century to the next, like a flame shared between hands. Jefferson lit his, and it still burns, quietly, imperfectly, but undeniably, in the heart of a nation still learning to balance its own light and shadow. Part 8 echoes through time. Night settles over the Blue Ridge Mountains. Monticello lies in silhouette, its white dome faintly glowing under a silver moon. The air is still, the kind of stillness that feels almost like listening. Down in the valley, the crickets sing, a soft and endless chorus. Above them, stars gather, the same stars Jefferson once mapped, the same constellations that kept him company when sleep refused to come. If you stand on the mountaintop long enough, you can almost imagine him still, there, a thin figure in a long coat, walking slowly along the terrace, hands clasped behind his back, eyes lifted toward the night sky, always thinking, always measuring, always dreaming. The sound of his steps merges with the rustle of leaves, and for a moment, time folds in on itself, the past breathing softly into the present. It's easy to forget that Jefferson lived before electricity, before railways, before the hum of modern life. His world was one of candlelight and quills, of handwritten dreams and wooden instruments. And yet, his thoughts travel faster than any wire could. They leap centuries. They live inside the language we speak every day: liberty, equality, pursuit. of happiness. Even the rhythm of those words feels like a heartbeat we've inherited. But the truth of Jefferson is quieter than those words. It lives in the spaces between them, in the doubts he never confessed, the letters written after midnight, the sleepless pacing of a man who could not rest because he loved the world too much to stop understanding it. He was not a man of comfort. He was a man of curiosity. Restlessness was his constant companion, and in that restlessness we find something profoundly human. The endless reaching of the mind toward something larger, something just out of reach. Think of him as an architect, not only of buildings and nations but of thought itself. He designed his days like he designed Monticello, carefully, deliberately, leaving space for light to enter. He believed that reason was not cold but luminous, that knowledge could warm the heart as much as it could sharpen the mind. And yet, even he wrestled with contradiction. He spoke of equality while living amid inequality. He dreamed of peace while governing through conflict. He built a house of reason, but lived with rooms full of silence. That duality is not failure. It is the condition of being human. Each of us holds within us both light and shadow, both conviction and doubt. Jefferson's life, in all its brilliance and blindness, is a reminder that progress is not the absence of contradiction, but the courage to confront it. He never stopped confronting it. Even in old age, when his hands could no longer steady a ruler or guide a quill without trembling, he continued to ask questions about politics, about morality, about the universe itself. What, after all, is life for, he once wrote, but to study and be astonished. That line, so simple, might be the quiet truth beneath his entire story. If you listen closely, you can hear that same question echo through the centuries. In every library light that burns late into the night, in every scientist's careful note, in every student who looks up from a textbook and wonders what lies beyond the known world. That curiosity, that steady hum of thought, is the inheritance he left behind. He believed that knowledge would outlive kings and armies, that books were the truest monuments, and that ideas once released could not be caged. Perhaps that's why his own library at Monticello grew into the Library of Congress, a living testament to the mind of a man who could not stop collecting the world. He wanted the future to think freely, to question bravely, to imagine boldly. He once wrote, "The earth belongs to the living." He meant that each generation must renew the world for itself, question the old, build the new. He would have wanted us to argue with him, to revise him, to grow beyond him, and that perhaps is his truest legacy, not worship, but conversation. We are meant to talk with Jefferson, not about him, to wrestle with his ideas the way he wrestled with his own. That dialogue is what keeps democracy alive, what keeps liberty from hardening into myth. Even the contradictions we find in him have something to teach us. They remind us that ideals are fragile and that virtue is not inherited. It is practiced, that even those who wrote of freedom must be held accountable to it, and that the story of America, like the story of Jefferson, is not a clean line but a long and winding path through shadow toward light. When we acknowledge both, the man becomes real again. Not a statue, not a symbol, but a person. Someone who loved, failed, built, doubted, and dreamed. Someone who knew the ache of sleepless nights and the soft comfort of dawn. Someone who believed, despite everything, that reason and beauty could still save us. Imagine him once more, at his desk. The room is dim, the candle nearly spent. He dips his pen into ink one last time. His handwriting is slow now, the letters curling with age, but still graceful. He is writing about the university, or perhaps about liberty. It hardly matters which. Outside, the first light of morning is creeping over the hills. He pauses, sets the pen down, and listens. In that silence, you can almost feel what he felt. The sense of being part of something larger, something unfinished, something that will continue after him. It's the same feeling that comes to anyone who creates, anyone who dreams. the quiet hope that their work might ripple outward, beyond their own time. He stands, walks to the window, and opens it. The morning air rushes in, cool and clean. He breathes deeply, the faint scent of soil and wood smoke filling his chest. Somewhere, a mockingbird begins to sing. He closes his eyes. Perhaps at that moment he felt peace. Perhaps not. But either way, the light continued to rise. Today, nearly 2 centuries later, his mountain remains. Visitors walk the paths he once walked, step into rooms he designed, read words he wrote. They see the contradictions, yes, but also the courage, the strange, delicate balance between failure and hope. The walls whisper stories. The floors creak under the weight of memory. And from the top of Monticello, the view stretches wide. The rolling hills, the silver rivers, the endless sky. It feels like a dream still unfolding. And maybe that's what Jefferson wanted all along. Not perfection, but possibility. Not a finished nation, but one forever becoming. He once said, "I am as happy no more and no less than the changing seasons." That may be the most honest measure of him. Like the seasons, he changed. He grew, he decayed, he returned. His ideas blossomed, fell, and took root again in the minds of others. In that cycle, his story continues, not in monuments or dates, but in the quiet persistence of thought. If you close your eyes now, you can almost hear the pages turning. Slow, steady, eternal. The story of a man who loved knowledge more than rest, who dreamed of a nation of thinkers, who believed that truth, however flawed its messengers, would one day set us free. The crickets keep singing, the stars keep shining, and somewhere, the ghost of Thomas Jefferson still walks the mountain, not as a figure of marble, but as a whisper, reminding us gently that freedom begins not in triumph, but in thought. He looks once more toward the horizon. He smiles, just barely, at the rising sun, and then at last he fades into the light.